At 91, I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The assassinations and attempted assassinations of state legislative personnel in Minnesota over the weekend, terrible stuff. A former House Speaker, state representative, member of the DFL party, and her husband were murdered by an individual who is now in custody, was taken into custody last night, and another state legislator and his wife were shot multiple times by the same alleged assailant. And
miraculously survived.
Yeah, they're so expected to survive, which is good news. He had a list of 70 names of people that were in or tangentially connected to politics, it's reported. And this is a guy who was, I mean, it's a little unclear about exactly what his professional background is. There's talk he was impersonating a police officer when he arrived at the homes of his targets in what looked like a police vehicle, in what looked like a police uniform. So that's perhaps why he got a response at the door from the people that he was targeting. Anyway, so background in security, background in Christian missionary work. He's living with another guy, but his wife and 3 relatives are picked up, apparently fleeing the jurisdiction. They haven't been arrested, but they were questioned. This is the text that he left his roommate, that his roommate then relayed to the local press.
I love you guys. I made some choices, and you guys don't know anything about this, but I'm going to be gone for a while. Sorry. Take your time. Maybe dead shortly. So I just want to let you know that I love you guys both, and I wish it had gone this way. I don't want to say anything more and implicate you in any way, because you guys don't know anything about this. But I love you guys, and I'm sorry for all the trouble this has caused.
And on Friday, he paid him 4 months of rent. I gave him a $900 check.
Strange. A 57-year-old white dude.
Yeah.
He apparently had been appointed to a state workforce board in Minnesota back under former Governor Mark Dayton. But it's not clear if he had any particular interactions or motivations with the people he did shoot and the other people on his list. Because, for example, the Speaker of the House who he murdered had voted for this compromise budget deal that included removing people in this country illegally from Minnesota's state Medicaid rolls. But the senator who he shot, the state senator he shot, voted against that budget deal. Yeah. So it's just a little unclear. Jack Brewer is a former Vikings standout. He told Fox News, "We need to start calling this what it is. These people have lost their minds. I'm heartbroken to see one of the most amazing states in America completely turned around under Governor Tim Walz. Minnesota is confused. Minnesota has become the capital of chaos in America. It's not right. It's not a reflection of the true people of Minnesota. There are a lot of good people there, but the liberal hub around Minneapolis and St. Paul has taken over, and it's dangerous. Tim Walz is the leader of that. His Attorney General, Keith Ellison, is right there with him."
And to make things even more bizarre, Vance Balter, he was charged in Hennepin County with it wasn't premeditated. I mean, he was literally wearing a mask and had a hit list. So it seems premeditated to me, but he was not charged. This is such a a joke.
Well, let's get more information on what is currently known. John Hinderaker is the president of Center of the American Experiment, which is up in Minnesota, and a contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be with you, Dan.
So can you color in any of those details or connect any of those dots if they do indeed connect?
Well, yes and no. I mean, facts are coming out. So, for example, he was reappointed. Bolter was reappointed to that Workforce Development Board by Tim Walz, and the certificate recites that Walz is doing it because of his exceptional integrity and ability and so forth. And, of course, now we're being told Walz never heard of the guy, which could be true.
That could be true.
But he obviously at some point had some political connections, and nothing has come out about what in the world, prompted first Dayton, then Walz to put this guy on that governor's commission. Everybody's relying very heavily on statements by this so-called roommate, David Carlson, who's the only one who's really spoken about Bolter's alleged political proclivities, and he says he wasn't a very political guy. He says he thinks he voted for Trump, but the majority of the country voted for Trump, so that's not particularly revealing. Carlson says that he was opposed to abortion, but he wasn't obsessed about it. So we don't really have a clear picture of this guy's views, and probably the most meaningful information we've got is who's on that list. And it sounds like they were, the press has described them as DFL political figures and abortion providers. Well, I don't know. I mean, they say pro-abortion political figures. Well, all of the DFL party is pro-abortion, so that does not, in fact, narrow it down. And the authorities have said they're not going to release his so-called manifesto, which he left behind in his vehicle. So, that's kind of what we know so far. This guy Carlson has said that Bolter's wife, Jenny, called him, and she was as shocked as he was that Bolter apparently had done this, and she had no explanation for it either. But then the next thing you know, she's being stopped driving north in central Minnesota with passports in her car, a firearm and ammunition, and some unnamed relatives who I assume are probably some of the Bolter's five children. Yeah. So is she fleeing to Canada? I don't know. I mean,
it sure looked like it.
Way.
Well, they detained her. She was picked up outside of a convenience store, and they detained her for 3 hours, but they let her go for some reason. But what's her relationship with Tim Walz? I'm hearing rumblings that she worked for Tim Walz, or is that just another rumor?
I think it's just another rumor. I mean, it could be true, but I've seen no evidence of that. I've seen her described as a Tim Walz intern at one time. Well, Bolter was 57, and she was something, close to that. So unless she was a 52-year-old intern, I don't see how that would be true. So there are facts that we still don't know here. But I think what we can say is that this is just an astonishingly awful, evil series of actions carried out by a guy. It's really a puzzle. I mean, everybody's kind of scratching their head over how this guy stabbed and this. His background is very obscure. He spent a little time as an evangelical preacher in the Congo. He claims to have had some background in security, although that's very obscure. He was trying to get a security business off the ground, but that really hadn't happened. And in the meantime, he had a job transporting bodies for a morgue, and I believe was working at a local 7-Eleven store. So the whole picture is just, very, very strange.
Well,
and he apparently had some money at one time. He had a pretty expensive house down in South Minnesota, but he lived there part of the time. But part of the time he lived in this place in North Minneapolis with a couple of guys that he knew, and reportedly that was to be closer to his work. So there's a lot we don't know.
Well, and there's also reporting, by the way, that there were pro-life advocates also on his hit list. But I suppose we'll see.
And the other thing we should mention, Dan, and again, who knows what it means, but in his vehicle, he had a big stack of flyers that said "No Kings." I don't think they said anything else, just "No Kings." So what does that mean?
I don't know. Well, but you mentioned authorities have said they're not going to release his manifesto. I wonder if the FBI will come in and take over this case and perhaps have a different attitude at some point, because, we that because this is going to be controversial again, and we'll be fighting over this. The need for transparency here, rather than trusting law enforcement, especially when law enforcement is under the direction of Jacob Fry in Minneapolis.
Well, or Keith Ellison at the state level,
Same deal,
or if he's charged in Hennepin County, which is where the murder, I think that is where he's charged. That's Mary Moriarty, who was the pro-crime county attorney in that county.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, so he's been charged this morning. I don't know if you had a chance to review the charges, but second-degree murder, not premeditated. I mean, he had on a creepy silicone mask over his face and was looked exactly like a police officer. I'm just surprised. Do you think there's some favoritism going on there?
Well, I don't know how it could be any more premeditated. I assume that what they're doing here is they're beginning with these charges.
Yeah.
There'll be an ongoing investigation, and they can amend the charges, and I assume that they're going to do that.
Yeah. Pulling back from this, particularly since Minneapolis, St. Paul was one of those areas where the political power structure platformed violence towards political ends. What was the No Kings activity like over the weekend up there?
Well, they had a big crowd. There was a report that was canceled because this guy was on the loose, and some of the people who were going to be speaking there apparently were on his list. But they went ahead anyway. Walz didn't show up. The lieutenant governor didn't show up. But Keith Ellison, the attorney general, did, and he gave this rabid anti-Trump speech. And reports are that there were something like 20,000 people at the state capitol. So I think they had a good turnout for that anti-Trump rally.
So in other words, no lessons have been learned or will be learned.
No, and I think that's really the point, Dan. I mean, these political assassinations and attempted assassinations are few and far between, but in a country of 340 million or whatever it actually is, it doesn't take a lot of lunatics, and you start building up a track record of these kinds of violent acts. And of course, when it happens, the reality is that all of us, our first thought is, well, I hope it wasn't one of our crazies. I hope it was one of the crazies on the other side. And it's kind of sad that everybody says, we got to condemn all political violence and not try to make hay out of it. But the DFL party already is putting out various kinds of reports and feeding information to journalists, trying to paint this guy as somebody on the right as opposed to the left. And I think the reality is he wasn't a very political guy, period.
Speaking of Tim Walz, since he had his star turn right next to our governor there, Pritzker, last week before the House Oversight Committee, how was his sort of, we all need to work together and get along, glossing over the sanctuary state implications in Minnesota? How was that received back home?
It's really hard to say. One of the local TV stations did a poll and claimed to find Walz at 58% approval. I'm skeptical of that. A much smaller percentage said they wanted to run for a third term, which apparently he's going to do. So I guess we'll find out. It's hard for me to believe he's got that kind of an approval rating after the disastrous vice presidential run, and understanding that the state of Minnesota has really been slipping badly in recent years. This is something that my organization is constantly talking about. Well, that fact is finally kind of seeping into the consciousness of
Well, didn't he have a budget surplus when he took office?
Oh yeah, $17.6 billion.
Billion.
Billion. Yeah, they've spent it all. They didn't rebate anything to the taxpayers. They just spent it. So now we're looking at a budget deficit, and we had this crisis in the legislative session that just ended, where they're trying to solve the budget deficit that is looming.
Well, how bad is the budget deficit?
Well, there's a structural deficit right now. In 2024, the state government took in $4.7 billion less than it spent. So we're simply spending down that surplus. The structural deficit is around $2 billion. And of course, what those of us on the right are trying to do is cut spending so that not only do we eliminate the structural deficit, but we have some room to cut taxes, which is what we desperately need to do.
Well, that was why the socialists were crying, because they had to agree to this budget deal that eliminated Medicaid coverage for people in this country illegally residing in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The leadership made that deal. And by the way, the former speaker, Melissa Hortman, didn't vote for that because she really wanted to cut off that medical care for illegal aliens. She was in favor of doing it, but as the DFL leader in the House, which is tied 67-67, she had to vote for the deal that she had negotiated.
Right.
That's why she was the lone Democrat voting for that.
Yeah.
For that proposal.
And crying about having to do so,
and
too.
Crying about it on camera, yeah, right.
John Hinderaker, president of Center of the American Experiment and contributor to Powerline, powerlineblog.com. John, thanks as always.
Great to be with you, Dan.
Thank you, too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today.